my first question, just in case anyone hasn't heard about what Darkest Dungeon is and who you are, how would you best describe what Darkest Dungeon is for people at home? Darkest Dungeon 2, whatever.
Well, Darkest Dungeon is it's like a gothic turn-based RPG. It's got stylized artwork. It's pretty uncompromising. We punish bad decisions in the game, so people can find it quite difficult and frustrating at times, which is kind of part of its charm. And Darkest Dungeon 2 specifically is like a roguelite in its structure, where you do repeated runs with the same party and work through 5 story bosses, upgrading things along the way and struggling to survive. And the entire hook of the franchise is really about like the mental toll that adventuring would theoretically take. If you spend all your days like killing and trying to find food and surviving, it would be a stressful situation. And so we try to kind of gamify that, and that's kind of like a hallmark of the series.
Yeah, well, actually, before we get into like Darkest Dungeon 2, because I've been a big fan of the game like since the first one, and I've always been curious because you said like when you look into like who is Red Hook Studio and everything, it says they were founded in 2013, and obviously you says you're the co-founder and also like the art director and stuff. But I'm really curious on like what's like your background in gaming, and how did you even get be like this is going to be the start of Red Hook Studio?
Yeah. Well, I did like an animation degree like 20 plus years ago, and I didn't really like animating, but I always loved drawing and doing like the textures and stuff on models. And so I mean, you finish your program and you got to look for a job. But I pitched like a small platformer game around and managed to get like a job at a studio with it, and it just kind of worked for like I guess it would have been about 15, 16 years, just in different capacities in the game industry. You get a job here as an artist, you get a job over here as a lead artist, the art director. I did a year working on a cartoon show just to try it. I freelanced for about a year and a half, 2 years, just doing stuff for Games Workshop and like just commission based stuff. During that time I had met Tyler Sigmund, who became like a good friend of mine, and we kind of talked about maybe doing something together. And then the timing just kind of lined up one day, and we had I'd gotten a decent tax return, and so I was like, if we're ever gonna do anything, now's the time. I already had one kid, and I was like, I'm gonna not be able to really like properly go for it, in another 5 or 10 years. It's not going to be realistic. So we just kind of dove in on the idea and did a sort of a mock gameplay / teaser trailer, and put that on YouTube first, just to see if there's any like interest in what we were planning on doing, because we were both like, mid-30s and basically in a position where we're going to sacrifice everything we've earned in our careers up until that point, because we were just bootstrapping. We didn't have any financial investment other than that. So, we just kind of moved through those gates. We did the YouTube trailer, then we kind of tried to build anticipation towards a Kickstarter campaign, and then that went really well. So with each stage, we kind of gained a little confidence that Darkest Dungeon, the first game, would find an audience. But it was pretty scary. I was down to like my last $5,000 by the time we launched the game, and that's like terrifying when you have a mortgage and everything else. But we managed to get it over the finish line, and it worked out. So.
Well, yeah, no, it's good. That's an incredible story, and like you were saying at the very start, like Darkest Dungeon is quite like it's a really unique game because, like you said, it's very punishing and everything. And the first one, I feel like compared to the second one, is like drastically different. Like you said, the second one is like a roguelike. And I'm just really curious, what made you want to decide to change the gameplay loop up quite drastically?
Yeah, I mean, we've been getting this question a fair bit, and we knew that it would be maybe a little controversial or unconventional, but there's a couple of reasons. We had spent 5 years on Darkest Dungeon, including DLC and expansions and all that, and so creatively we just wanted to do something different. We still really loved the IP and wanted to do more in that world with those characters. So we just try to never do anything that we don't have a genuine like creative desire to do. Cause I think that kind of, if you're not really excited about it, it can feel like a drag. And if it feels like a drag to make, then odds are when people play it, the love just isn't in the product. You know, it's a little airy fairy, but I believe that there's some amount of truth to it. So we wanted to be excited about what we were making. And having done the sort of XCOM adjacent light base building, you know, giant roster type of game, we just thought, you know, what would be an exciting twist on this? And we really got enamored with the idea of like kind of this dystopic road trip. I've been on a couple of road trips. They're always crazy, you know, like the couple that you start with always breaks up. Someone's, you know, like there's always these like kind of dramas and, you know, adventures that can happen that you didn't expect. And so we kind of got really attached to that idea. And then in order to pay that off and kind of be just as interested and excited about the second game as the first game, we felt like we had to make some changes to the structure of the game. So creative, like the desire to be like excited and not repeat ourselves was probably the foremost reason. The second reason was, you know, Darkest Dungeon, and I feel weird even saying it, but I'm very grateful for this, but you know, is really widely well regarded. But one of the biggest criticisms of the game, and I think it's absolutely fair, is that the middle section, it's too long. It takes too long to beat that game. And the middle section is a real slog. And we make a lot of choices in Darkest Dungeon 1 that even make it worse, where like, you know, you need 4 top level adventurers to go into the Darkest Dungeon. Once you use that party, they'll never go back. If you die, you wipe, you lose all your gear, all your trinkets. So it was extremely grindy, and I think great for what it was. But we felt like, you know, we could improve and try to condense the experience a little bit so that, you know, you get the interest and excitement of the pre-planning in the beginning, and then you get the payoff of kind of the end game without this massive, like 50-hour slog in the middle where you're just leveling like 30 characters up. I think if we released that game today with modern, like kind of more modern sensibilities in terms of like how players think, I don't know if it would have been as successful. People are a lot more sensitive to having their time respected in games. And so we just felt like, you know, it was an opportunity to kind of improve and address this sort of big resounding criticism of the first game, but just do it in a different way, as opposed to like, okay, take for granted that we have to have a base, you know, take for granted that we have to have a big roster.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's actually, so obviously you said you did a lot of like major changes for this game. What would you say was like the most challenging part of development for Darkest Dungeon 2?
Certainly like staffing up brings a lot of logistical challenges. You know, we were like 5 people on the first game, so it's easy to communicate. Everything is out in the open. There's very few crossed wires just because there's so few people. And so, you know, our final tally for Darkest Dungeon 2's development was somewhere in the order of like 26, 28 people. And so we grew slowly and carefully, but it is a huge, like, you know, like a 4x kind of growth in terms of the studio size. And so with it brings like just management overhead that can be kind of tough to deal with sometimes. Left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. I mean, we didn't suffer from it too badly, but I definitely noticed the difference. And the switch to 3D pipeline was a big challenge and investment. You know, we had to obviously rebuild the game entirely because we used our own engine the first time, and we're using Unity now. So we had to re-engineer everything from scratch. And so, you know, that was tough, and it takes longer to make stuff because the stuff is 3D. You know, I can't just draw it and pass it off to our animator and have him like kind of bounce the sprites around a little bit and then throw it in the game. It has to go through the entire process of modeling, texturing, rigging, animating. But the payoff is that the visual effects, the animations are more sophisticated, and it's like a kind of a reinvigoration of the art style from the first game. We felt, you know, similarly to the game structure itself, I felt like I could draw everything again twice as well and twice as fast, and people would be half as interested because they'd seen it all already, you know. So we thought like we have to step up our presentation game, you know, to make the second one really pop. So it was tough, but I think worth it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, like, I speak for a lot of people, like, since the game's launch, the game looks great, it's done well, it plays great, everything it looks like it's been really good. And I just want to, I know you guys are really in touch with, like, the community side of Darkest Dungeon. Like, I've noticed that, like, especially, like, indie game stuff, like, community's always a big aspect, but I've noticed for Darkest Dungeon, like, as a whole, the community's, like, a really strong part of the game. And I was just wondering if you could, like, maybe talk about that and how, like, how the community helps with the game and how big of a part of the community is of Darkest Dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a big part. I think that's what early access is all about. And this is our second time doing early access, and we really weren't afraid to kind of take the community's feedback and criticisms of the second game, at face value. And we've done, over the course of that year and a half that we spent in early access on the Epic Game Store, we did like significant surgery to the game. We replaced the progression system. We did massive updates to the relationship system. We, did a huge pass on the driving stuff or the traversal. So a lot of that stuff, all the way down to like the granular balance details is informed by, the community. And so we try to engage with them as much as we can. Our Discord is a really kind of like, it's a pretty positive place. And, we have a feedback channel, and even, most of the feedback, we get thousands and thousands of feedback messages, but they're all phrased pretty respectfully. They're easy to parse. And we scrub through that stuff all the time, and we keep our eye on Reddit, and social media and that kind of thing. So we, when we're trying to always like provide kind of outreach to the community, and you can see in our patch notes, when something was taken directly from a community member, we put a little icon next to it in the patch notes. Just to kind of show people like, yeah, this was one of your ideas. We thought it was cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. And like, I think the community loves like how like you guys don't only listen, but you actually implement a lot of the stuff people say. And like, so many people with Darkest Dungeon 2 have had so many new things they like about the game. But from like an actual developer's viewpoint, what's been like something that you've enjoyed working on the most whilst developing the new game?
I mean, I always like doing the monster and the boss designs. That's kind of like my favorite thing. Drawing all the crazy, kind of grotesque enemies is always fun. But I think honestly, the thing I'm most proud of personally on the game is probably all the script this time. I mean, I was obviously, I'm an art guy, so love the art. But I think writing like 5-part stories for each hero, and then like the overarching narrative was a big task, and I'm pretty happy with how that turned out.
Yeah, no, definitely showed. Like, I mean, one thing that I've always like thought about while playing the games, like the story's great, the script's great, and everything. But I mean, I don't know if this is just me, but I know a lot of other people have also thought this. How the hell do you even start to like think I'm gonna implement, like, how do you manage like stress? Because stress is a big factor in the game, obviously. How do you even begin to be like, right, how do we make this fair and not just like insanely unfair? Because obviously the game's punishing, but there's like, you don't want to be like too punishing, right?
Yeah, it's a fine line. It's tough because like, the game, it's a nasty game, right?
Mm-hmm,
so the reason why it's nasty is so that when you win, you feel something. Yeah. Because if it's easy the whole way along, then when you win, you're just like, okay, it's business as usual. And so you can't get the highs without the lows. And I've been watching a lot of streamers play the game, and they get tilted and rage when they wipe, and it took me 2 hours to get here and I wiped, and they get super pissed off. And then when the same streamer beats that boss, they're like shaking, they're all excited. And it's like, you can't get to that emotional place without having some hardship along the way. So that's the line we want to walk. And it's not easy, and there's no silver bullet science behind it. We have a dedicated combat designer. We have a dedicated item designer, because there's a lot of interfacing between those two systems. And then we obviously try to play test and use private test groups before we release stuff. But even then, things require kind of like live support to make sure that we're always just on that like razor's edge. And it's a tough part about making a Darkest Dungeon game, is because you're trading in frustration, and you just have to make sure that you're not overdoing it. And in places we have before, and we probably will again in a few places, but we're like highly sensitive to it. I mean, I think an example I can think of is like, we've discovered that if an enemy boss, like a single enemy, has like 4 turns, relative to your 4 turns as a party, it feels awful. The action economy just feels totally skewed in the boss's favor, even though it's mathematically even. Actually, because you have combat items in Darkest Dungeon 2, you technically could have 8 turns on your side. Nevertheless, it still feels exploitive and unfair when the boss has that many actions, or when they act too many times in a row. So we've had to go in and like code breaks in the turn order so that we can avoid that situation. When we design, we try to assume, okay, 3 is the most actions we can give a boss, that kind of thing, just to try to keep ourselves on the right side of that frustration line.
Yeah, no, I mean, because, I mean, I wouldn't even begin to know where to start with that stuff, but obviously, like, going back to something you said earlier, with the first game, you learned a lot of stuff, and, like, you've changed it for the second game. What would you say was, like, one of the most important things you learned when developing the first game that you brought into with Darkest Dungeon 2?
I think the most important thing we learned is actually goes back to your community point. It was like, if we're going to do changes or introduce big features, to put them in a beta branch. Even though we're in early access, big changes can be jarring, and we kind of learned that through we made some changes to the first game in early access that caused a bit of, like, I don't know, uproar in the community. And so from that experience, we kind of realized, like, we have to announce changes that are coming. We have to put them in a beta branch. We have to invite players into that beta branch to make sure that, like, it's an opt-in experience. We have to refine it there, get everybody kind of used to it a little bit, and then roll it out live, so that when it goes live, people who have had experience with it can kind of be our evangelists, in places like Reddit or Discord, and say, no, it's not that. This is what they're trying to do. It works. Trust me, that kind of thing. But if we just push it straight to the live retail branch, with no kind of preamble, that's where we can kind of get, just some kind of stronger reactions if the changes aren't well received.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, when, like, going back to, like, something I think I said at the start, like, what really appealed to me with Darkest Dungeon when I, like, got into it, like, ages ago, was, like, the art style. Like, I've always, like, that's just something for me, and I know a lot of other people love the art style of Darkest Dungeon. And I just really want to know from, like, but when you were developing the game, how do you go, like, yeah, this is the direction I'm taking the game with, like, visuals and art and, like, the whole atmosphere and everything? Because I think that's, like, such a big part of Darkest Dungeon. Yeah,
it is. The art style was it was a couple of things. It was a mashup of a couple ideas. I needed to work quickly if I was going to, this is for Darkest Dungeon 1. If I was going to draw everything, I needed to be able to work in a style that would allow me to produce a lot of stuff. I wanted to try to get back to, like, my kind of comic book upbringing. I had done a lot of, like, digital painting in my career, and it takes a long time to, like, render the specular highlights on, like, a gigantic shoulder pad. Like, it's just kind of looks beautiful, but I wanted something a little bit, kind of more old school. I wanted the art to feel like almost like an illuminated manuscript or like a woodcut. So it felt old, or at least somewhat timeless, I guess. Like it was from the period of time it was kind of trying to describe. And then I tried to, like, really make the art match the values of the game. So it's hard edged because the game is hard. It's got pooling blacks because you're always being, like, sucked up into a party wipe or, like a stress meltdown. And so just tried to, like, evangelize the ideals of the game and express them, with the art. I didn't draw like that before Darkest Dungeon. And now I can't not draw that way. It's been like 10 years of, like, heavy blacks, so it's going to be tough to shake that off if I ever have to switch gears again. But it's been cool, and I think it's refined itself over time too. I think we'll look back at some of my early stuff, and sometimes I'm a little bit cringe over it, but that's just the nature of any kind of creative enterprise. Your older stuff should be worse than your newer stuff, or else you haven't grown or learned anything, right? So, but yeah, that's kind of the sort of main principles behind designing the art direction. And then it was just in terms of tone, I had known Wayne June, our narrator, to be an audiobook guy, and I listened to a bunch of his stuff while I was freelancing, and so we just reached out randomly to him when we needed a trailer voiceover. And then when we heard the trailer with the music from Stuart Chatwood and saw the art all put together, it was like, okay, well, now we need a narrator in the game. Like that was it. We didn't have plans to do a narrator. We hadn't even thought about it. It was just like seeing that first teaser with his voice. I'm like, that has to be a thing in the game. So that's kind of where that started from.
Yeah, no, I mean the narration is like when you think of Darkest Dungeon, you immediately just think of like some of the quotes
Totally.
from him. Like
Yeah.
it's so iconic. Like, that was actually gonna be one of my questions. Like, how did you even like know he was the guy? Because like when you think of Darkest Dungeon, you do think of his voice.
Yeah. I mean, you knew he's going to be the guy because when you hear it, you just know. I mean, like I said, we needed a VO guy for our first trailer, and I thought, okay, well, we could reach out to this guy. I've heard him do audiobooks before. He sounds really cool. And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And then, yeah, I'll never forget it. Actually, it was like we had the final mix going in at Power Up Audio's home studio, and we just kind of heard everything together, and we're like, that's it. Like that has to be part of the game. It just became immediately like something that we couldn't live without. And so yeah, then we just started working with him, and it's been great. He's a total pro, and it's great. I can hear his voice as I write some of the lines. I can like hear how he's going to deliver it, so I can anticipate. But it's been awesome.
That's actually really cool because you just talk about how like when you were mixing up the trailer and everything and you were like, this is it. How does it feel like as an indie game developer? Obviously, like not many people are ever going to be able to experience this sort of feeling, but how does it feel knowing like your whole project is about to get released and like there's so many people anticipated for it? Because obviously the first one and even now more so the second one, a lot of people are excited for Darkest Dungeon 1 and 2. So like, how does that feel?
Kind of. I mean, I'd love to be like, it feels amazing, and blah blah blah. It feels scary. It's like, especially with the second one, like the sophomore album is a real thing. It's we felt the weight of expectation for sure, and being in a position where we're about to, well, we've released it now, but being close to the release, we were just working as hard as we could to make the game as good as possible because we knew that it would be up against this expectation and people would compare it to the first game. And we knew that some people would compare it unfavorably to the first game. And so it's kind of was a little, it was tough, man. It's tough to know that there's that appetite. Like you'd think it would be like, oh, so we know it'll be successful. But to be honest, it felt the opposite. It was like, we have to be really careful that we don't like blow it. This game has to be even better to be perceived as even close to as good as the first game. It has to almost be better. Because it's like, there's no way to kind of get out totally from the shadow of its older brother. So I took a lot of that expectation and enthusiasm, perhaps incorrectly. Maybe a therapist would have a better perspective, but I took it as like kind of pressure and a little bit of fear, So it didn't feel great is my answer. But it is amazing that, like it's a very crowded marketplace, and to know that your game has an audience waiting for it is also reassuring. So it's this very weird, like sweet and sour sauce of kind of these two feelings of like intense creative pressure, but then a little bit of like, okay, well, at least people will know that we're out, right? Which is tough for a lot of small studios to get their game even noticed. So we don't take that for granted. And I think the pressure that, that I felt, or that, maybe we felt collectively, was just because we felt like we wanted to do right by this community that had supported us. We wanted to make something that they would enjoy. We wanted to make something that, we were proud of and that they could get into and that they felt was like a worthy successor. So there's a lot of feelings. It's always like a kind of a mixed bag.
No, definitely. I mean, one of my things that I was like, because obviously I was looking into like a bunch of interviews you guys have done with like other people beforehand. And I noticed, like, when you guys were talking about, like, the pre-alpha build of the game and the early access, all that stuff, there was, like, a bunch of different changes you guys did. Like, was it, I can't remember what interview you did, but you said you didn't even have, like, the end game, like, boss part for one of, like, the early builds or something, right? Something similar to that. And I was just wondering, like, what is, like, the sort of next big thing you're working on for Darkest Dungeon 2? Because obviously the game's, like, 1.0, and if you look at, like, Darkest Dungeon 1, like, the game was, like, at the first release to, like up until Darkest Dungeon 2, drastically different.
Yeah. And I mean, just as a quick callback, like that's part of what is tough about the comparison, because I find a lot of people subconsciously or even consciously. They're comparing like Darkest Dungeon 1 with 4 DLCs and 6 years of development effort to Darkest Dungeon 2, which is at a 1.0, right now. So we've got a couple of pretty exciting plans. We're looking at a combination of just kind of like DD1, like free updates, and also some paid DLC. So we want to flesh it out and grow it the same way we did the first game. It worked really well, and it was my favorite time, I think, as a developer was working on the DLC and the post-release content for Darkest Dungeon 1. So I'm happy to be back in that place.
Yeah, no, awesome. I mean, literally my final question, just to wrap everything up, is there anything you want to say to the fans or like the people listening?
No, I just want to say thank you so much, really, for the support and for showing up, and hopefully you've failed more than a few times in playing the game, and that's as designed. But yeah, the team was really excited, and it was really powerful moment there on launch day to see such a great Twitch viewership and see people reacting on social media, and that's really that's very validating. So we're just getting started. It's like a new phase of development for the game, and we're looking forward to taking it some places.